Well, Joe Rogan is in the middle of finding Jesus. And right when it was most lucrative. It's amazing how often that spiritual ollie ollie oxen free coincides with one's financial interests, isn't it? And honestly, not that atheism doesn't have its prominent assholes, but I feel like the list of people who feel pushed out speaks volumes to the quality of our company. Joe Rogan, Shia LaBeouf, Russell Brand, J.D. Vance. The fact that these people don't feel welcome at our party says a lot about our party. Now, to be clear, the Joe Rogan thing isn't coming from Joe Rogan, at least not yet. It's coming from a Canadian apologist named Wesley Huff, who is clearly floating a trial balloon on Rogan's behalf, right? Huff is a Christian apologist who guested on Rogan's show earlier this year when Rogan saw his ratings dipping a little bit and realized he needed to lean all the way into his conservative douchebag persona. After he put his thumb on the scale of the presidential election, he knew his brand was poison with liberals forever after. And conservatives are pretty forgiving of white men if their only sins are things like sexual assault, rape, and fraud, but they don't abide an atheist for long. So Rogan has this professional Bible liar on his show. He pretends to find it convincing the way that he pretended to find, Trump's batshit yammering convincing. Then he starts to rethink the whole atheism thing. Then he starts to go to church, and what do you know? He suddenly finds Christ. We're at the going to church phase now, an activity that many people do on a weekly basis in advance of adopting that religion. But yeah, so now Huff, he's talking about on his own podcast and to any media outlet that'll listen to him about how he's in regular communication with Rogan about his ongoing spiritual journey, helping him sort out his misgivings about the Bible, guiding him through his relationship with Jesus, answering his questions about the scripture, yada, yada, yada. You have to keep in mind that atheism has been a pretty big part of Joe Rogan's personal brand, as long as talking about Joe Rogan's personal brand wouldn't have been a punchline, right? The whole "I'm a skeptical guy who doesn't accept the official story" charade it's his primary appeal, right? People inclined to trust their gut over climate scientists, or in a pinch, an MMA announcer's gut over climate scientists, eat that shit up with a spoon. They love the fantasy that they can outsmart all them limp dick science nerds with their country gumption, and Joe Rogan allows them to role play that on an episode by episode basis. Now, if I had to guess at this point, I'd assume that Rogan is trying to find out if he can occupy a middle ground here, right? Like to maintain his skepticism of Christianity while still attending church often enough to appease Christians. And if I had to guess further, I would say that no, that will not be enough for them. And further still, I'd guess that he will eventually accept that that's the case, and he'll very publicly declare his conversion to Christianity, thereby ultimately leading his audience to where they already were. But despite the naked cynicism of his conversion of convenience, Christianity will spin it as a major coup. In fact, they're already doing so. Every story I saw about this, which to be fair, legitimate news sources don't give a fuck about Joe Rogan regularly attending church. So the only stories that I saw about this were from like Fox News and Breitbart and the Daily Mirror and shit. But every story I saw about this pointed to it as further evidence of this mythical Gen Z revival among young men. Not that anybody's mistaking the 57-year-old Rogan for a young man, but of course his show has a ton of appeal to that demographic. So they're showing this as the inevitable result of his audience turning to Christ en masse and him going, oh, must be something up with all this great Jesus stuff. And by the way, if you want evidence of what bullshit this narrative is, this Gen Z revival narrative is, you need look no further than the evidence that they are offering up as to what bullshit it isn't. It's all either anecdotal or nonsensical, or both. Like this example that Huff offered on Rogan's show, he said, quote, "We had a Christian bookstore reach out to us recently, and they said, we have people walking through this door asking young people, teenagers, saying, 'I want a Bible. All my friends are reading this thing,'" end quote. And when they're not using fucking hearsay to the second power, they're using stats from the American Bible Society with what the fuck would that even mean statistics like, quote, "Millennials saw a 29% increase in Bible use from 2024 to 2025. And, quote, "Among Gen Z, scripture engagement rose from 11% in 2024 to 15% in 2025, end quote. And no, even with terms that squishy, the Fox News article that I'm quoting didn't tell us, about the Gen Z Bible use or the millennial scripture engagement, how that was doing. And look, it's hard to take this shit seriously. It's hard to take Joe Rogan seriously. Marsh and Cecil try to do it every week over on the No Rogan podcast. They barely manage, and they're fucking professionals. But this nothing-ass story about Rogan attending church is a sign of something that should scare the hell out of us. Christianity, the most homophobic, regressive, sexist kind of Christianity, is consolidating power. And if you want to know what religion does when it has power, just look at literally any point in history where that was the case.